Welcome back to another episode of The Fertile Dark. I'm your host, Dan, and today is going to be a solo episode. This week, or at least the week of recording this, The Fertile Dark turns 2 years old, and I thought it would be a great opportunity just to reflect back on the last 2 years of making the podcast and share some insights, some lessons learned, and even some of the things that are potentially coming in the future. I had a recent conversation yesterday with someone who listens to the podcast and was really surprised at some of the things they shared that were positive. And also there was a realization that apparently I don't share a lot about myself and my own journey. And so I thought, at least for part of today, for those of you who are new here, for those who've been listening for a while, just share a little bit about The Fertile Dark, how I came up with the name, how the podcast started, a little bit of how I got to the place that I'm at, and just as a way of being able to honor the journey that it's been so far. It's interesting to consider the process of coming to even creating this podcast, as well as the evolution of it, especially when I consider where I've come from. So the podcast started as a project that I developed during my psychology master's program. There were a variety of different things that I had been learning about that led up to and felt like they were really contributing to the genesis of the project, of the podcast. One was a course that I took that has probably been one of the most influential classes I've ever taken. It's called Sacred Purpose and Professional Practice. I took it with an absolutely amazing instructor who is probably one of the most influential instructors that I've had in my master's program, but also in school in general. In that, we looked a lot about this idea of the call of the soul, the soul's purpose, like that longing that we each have inside to show up in the world in an individually unique and authentic way that has been with us from the very beginning. We did a lot of work around that. And I found myself feeling this interest or pull, desire to stand in this place in between and really help people deepen their experience across the spheres of their own experience and knowing and being. And then I took a class that I wasn't originally interested in taking and frankly was quite difficult. It was a creative entrepreneurship class, but the emphasis of the class was on the transformational economy. The idea is that economies evolve over time and they go from offering goods and services to experiences, and that the current evolution of the economy at least in the Western world, is moving away from experiences into offering transformation, that consumers are more interested in transformation than they are in goods, services, and experiences. As part of that class, we were all required to create a business plan, which I would say my business plan was fine. It was really about starting an individual private practice for therapy. It wasn't about the podcast at all, but it really just kind of got my wheels turning a little bit. It got me thinking a little bit about, how am I showing up in the world? What am I offering to the world? How am I contributing to the greater whole? And around that period of time, I actually got quite sick. I became quite ill. I'd been doing some volunteer work that was taking a lot of energy, and something that I had a lot of expertise in, but that the people that I worked for, I think, really just didn't appreciate the way I was showing up. I think there was a sense of feeling threatened or challenged in a way that was really none of my intention. And so I was doing a lot of effort there and consistently being told I wasn't doing it right. It wasn't good enough. People weren't interested in it. Lots of interpersonal conflict and challenging power dynamics. And Then on top of that, I've got school, I've got a family with kids, and I'm also working full time as a teacher, like an elective teacher for a high school. So I had a whole lot on my plate at once, and I came to a point where an issue that I've really dealt with for the better part of the last, I would say, 20 years. I have this respiratory issue where I get this cough and it won't go away. All the doctors over the years have told me either A, nothing's wrong with me, or B, they just don't understand what's happening. But this cough came in, this respiratory issue came in, and I remember for probably about a month, I couldn't go to work very often. I was struggling in school. At the time I was taking a research class, and I remember in my 7-week class, I was 5 weeks behind. And I spent most of the time in my living room laying on the couch. I couldn't sleep in my bed because I'd be coughing all night and my partner couldn't get any sleep. I found that I would cough so much, I would throw up. I'd cough so much, I'd get lightheaded and feel like I was going to pass out. It was really, really difficult. And this persisted for the better part of a month. I did chest scans. I tried all the medicines. I went to the doctor 6 different times. I saw 4 different providers or 5 different providers, and no one can figure it out. I got chest scans, I got blood work, I got all the things. And I remember one day I was sitting in my kitchen and I was coughing and coughing and coughing, and I'd like burst a blood vessel in my eye, and I got really lightheaded, and I was like, I fell on the floor. I think I was like on my knees on the floor and just couldn't breathe. And I remember thinking, like, I think this is it. I think I'm about to go. I think I'm about to die right now. And thankfully I didn't. And I came back to my spot on the couch and laid down, and it was like I felt like I had a second chance almost. Like there was an opportunity to kind of go to the edge and take a step back and reevaluate and reassess. And I had all these different data points going on with what I was learning about myself, what I was learning in school. I have this deep passion for depth psychology and for mythology and spirituality. Like those 3 things I feel really strongly about, really connected to. And I don't know how I settled on the idea of creating a podcast. I just remember one day I wrote up the whole plan, put the whole thing together. It just kind of emerged on the page. And then I just started. I talked to a couple people about it. I felt really awkward. I felt really like anxious and uncomfortable. Like, is this even a thing that I can do? What do I have to offer the world? What am I even looking for? And in some ways there was a desire to have an offering to give people some value. And in other ways, it was very much about seeing who I wanted to become and the podcast being a vehicle to help me get there. I don't think that I'm any better than anybody else. I think I have different knowledge and experience than some people, but I really wanted to become this version of myself that I was learning about. And the podcast became a vehicle for that, a way to help me research and learn and synthesize and share. And then over time, it was very much like I was seeing that the world we were living in, it just wasn't aligned with a lot of the things that felt important based on what I was learning about and researching. And it felt more important to create and share things that felt like a counterpoint to what I see happening in the world around us. You know, I see a lot of hyper-rational expression. I think a lot of ignore and override, a lot of productivity, hustle culture, a lot of like immediate gratification, a lot of people like in their late teens and 20s feeling like they have to make it big right away or they're a total failure. And there's just so many of these things that I've been seeing and so many things that honestly feel so distressingly sad and or unhealthy. And I felt like even if nobody listens, it will help me to be able to be secure in a place of feeling like a voice that is pushing against that, for asking for more wholeness, more healthiness, more healing, deeper and more meaningful relationships and community. So I went that route. And I feel like it has been a really wonderful, challenging experience. I love it when I get to chat to people about the podcast. We have great experiences together. We talk about all kinds of things. I remember I did the episode on dream work, like the importance of dreams, which was really, I think it was like one of my first 10 episodes that I recorded. And a friend of mine at work came and found me, and we were at a training together. We had flown from Arizona to Salt Lake City, and we were at a training, and I was not having a great time. And then he was like, "Hey, I listened to that episode on dreams, and can we talk about it together?" And it really shocked me. I mean, I didn't expect this particular individual to approach me. I didn't expect him to even have listened to anything I recorded. And then we just had, I remember we were sitting in this, I think it was like in a mall, like kind of food court. I think we were having like Band Express or something. But I just remember sitting there talking together for maybe an hour about dream work and feeling like, wow, I'm really surprised that someone listened to what I had to say and was interested in it enough to have this conversation. And it really, I think, was one of the most impactful moments that I've had related to the podcast over the last few years. And so, I don't know, Justin, if you still listen, thank you. That really was such a beautiful gift that you gave me. Another thing that really, I think, contributed to the podcast itself was a lot of where I had come from. So for me, psychology and like specifically depth psychology was something that I came to unexpectedly, I would say. Like I had been in the military for a long time. I was in the U.S. Army for 21 years. And my first job was as an infantryman. I went to Iraq in 2003 and then in 2005, did combat deployments there. My unit was the front line in the invasion of Iraq. I went back 2005 and we did a lot of counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, fighting against Al-Qaeda in Iraq stuff. This is a lot of pretty heavy violence, a lot of really grisly stuff. Some really beautiful experiences too, but primarily ugly and horrific, I would say. It's safe to say. And then I left the military full time and went on a religious mission for my church for 2 years, came back, went to school, dropped out of school, went back to the military part time and spent the rest of my career in the reserves. And the military was a one thing I felt like I was good at, but it felt like a safety net too. And I feel like it put me in a lot of hard positions because I just hadn't been addressing what was happening on the inside. And I started to find that place inside of things needing to be different, needing to be better. I started to feel very misaligned with the leadership in the military, with my experiences, how I viewed things, among a lot of other things. I also changed jobs. I went from being an infantryman to supervising the communications section and primarily focusing on radio communications, and then switched into a job called civil affairs, which is all about working with non-combatants in the battlefield and doing more, as much as I think can be said for the military, peacekeeping, a lot more people-centered work rather than combat-centered work, which I felt a lot more fulfillment with. But I also started to feel like this just isn't it. I can't keep doing this anymore. and eventually finished up my time in the military and found myself in this position of being asked to go to grad school for work. And I, along the way, had been finding ways to start to develop myself and improve myself and start to try and find some healing from a lot of hard experiences, both my combat experiences, my other military experiences, my childhood experiences. And the thread that I noticed was that what I found myself most interested in was always stuff connected to depth psychology. And so then I went on this grad school journey. The way that really kind of connects to what I'm trying to share about is that I wanted to share more about the things that have been so helpful and meaningful to me along the way. Like I realized that people have a lot of hard experiences in their life, whether that's, childhood, family of origin, kind of things, job-related things, general life-related things. And the topics that I am interested in the podcast are things that have been personally helpful to me. For example, one of the very first things that I ever did therapeutically was doing this guided imagery exercise. Essentially what I did was I processed a very intense traumatic event using this guided imagery, which then eventually led me to deep imagery and reading The Personal Totem Pole by Stephen Gallegos, which then led me into Jungian psychology, which then sent me back into like post-Jungian psychology and the way that Jung talks about the psyche. And then it took me into myth, and it took me into like other facets of spirituality. And I found my whole life shifting around this intersection of topics in a way that I felt really can contribute to the overall well-being of people in their life wherever they're at. And so that's kind of how I settled on that set of topics for the podcast. And then, the Fertile Dark just felt like such an easy name to come to. There's so many different examples of similar things, right? The sacred dark, the dark night of the soul. But the idea is that the dark places that we find ourselves in are the place where we find the most opportunity for growth and development. And those dark places have so much potential for growth. They really are a fertile ground for us to find growth. So that's kind of how it all came together. And I wish I could say that I feel like I am as good as I want to be at creating content. I have found that it can be quite a struggle. Particularly the last year, I left my career of teaching and transitioned into being a therapist. And the last year was my internship period. So I was working really hard. I was not getting paid. The growth curve was intense. I put the microphone down for basically a year because I was so overwhelmed doing school and internship, feeling very stressed about everything. It's not the only time I've taken an unplanned pause, but I've tried to give myself a lot of grace in being able to have a human experience and honor what my system is telling me that I need. And so if that has caused any of our listeners distress or frustration, I do apologize for that. I know I'm also not the best at creating kind of supplemental content. Sometimes I have bursts of energy and I get it done, but I mean, it really is like Charmaine and I have started recording together, and that's been really beautiful and helpful. I really love her and working with her. Outside of those, I'm the one that's responsible for all the editing and the supplemental stuff, the creation that goes up on social media and stuff like that. And I just don't always have the energy or the time to do it. And I wish that I did. And maybe one day I'll have more. I would love for that to happen. But that's definitely one of my goals, is to try and figure that out. And yet, in spite of all of that, I'm so honored and grateful to all of you that tune in and listen. There are people that listen from across the United States, or people who listen in other countries. And it's a thing that I don't know that I ever expected to happen. And every time it comes up, it blows me away. It always just surprises me to my core every time someone comes up and talks to me about the podcast, or they listen to it and tell me their thoughts about it, or they want to like give ideas for episodes or ask questions about it. And it really is such a meaningful experience to me. I think about a recent experience I had at a good friend's house, who we actually did a recent episode. My friend Orlean, who sometimes listens as well. And so I really love her so much. She such a wonderful, wonderful human. But we were at her home, and another friend, several friends and I were sitting around the table, and we were just talking about the podcast, and we were talking about the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. We had this beautiful conversation. Those are the moments that always catch me off guard, and then I find myself very touched and moved by, when I find myself feeling seen and supported by others. And so, like Orlean and Roxy, like those moments, like really so much thank you. And to everybody else that I talk to, or that we have conversations about it, I might get awkward, but I also just know that I'm really so genuinely moved and appreciative every time. I did want to just share a couple of things that I've learned, or that stand out to me as I think back on the last 2 years, which this probably isn't going to be a 2-year worth of a list. It's probably going to be more like the last 3 to 6 months, if I'm being honest. These are things that stand out from episodes we've recorded or research that I'm doing on future episodes, but that feel really relevant for the here and now, like in the types of challenges that we are experiencing collectively and individually. So one thing that I find that comes up often is this word should. It comes up all the time. It should be like this. I should be doing this. Should, I feel like, is this really persistent, pervasive idea. And I love the therapeutic proverb, don't should on yourself. Because I feel like it really does come up so much. I hear it all the time at work. I hear it all the time from other people that I know. Should comes in often as a way that we, I think, hope to challenge ourselves to improve and to be better and to do things differently. However, should is a really dangerous word that, rather than encouraging us to be better, it comes across and really lands more often as I'm supposed to be this way, supposed to act or speak or live in a certain way that is primarily driven by external expectations that are advocating for me to be something other than I am. Should is really a shame-based message. Conveys this idea of shame, blame, judgment, guilt, and rarely, if ever, contributes to a healthy opportunity for change. It is pervasive, and I have yet to find a situation where should is driven from a place of authentic, like, well-being. Every time I sit down and explore the should with myself or with somebody else, it always comes back to this person or group of people told me that I need to be different than I am. Great example that I find, at least in my own experience, is around neurodivergence. So when I talk to people who have autism or ADHD, there is this message of shame that they so often carry. I shouldn't be the way that I am. I should be different. If only I was different than I am, things would be better. It's also the case for so many other things. It comes up when we find ourselves not adhering to the status quo. We are deviating from the accepted social norm, and then we get a lot of external challenge, a lot of external feedback that's quite negative, telling us to be different. I think my favorite analogy for should is the way that Hiccup is treated in the first How to Train Your Dragon film, where so many people point to him and they just tell him, stop being, and they just kind of like point at him, like, just stop being so you. And then he responds with, you just gestured to all of me. That's the effect that should has on our system, is that we are told, don't be you, be not you. And it's really, really harmful. So don't should on yourself. Another thing that I come up against, or that I've really been thinking about, is that I find there's a real bias towards challenging our thoughts and behaviors to help us facilitate change. And there's definitely some wisdom to that. Anytime yes, I mean, there's definitely an importance to challenging our thoughts and behaviors, to seeing logical fallacies, to seeing maladaptive thought and behavior patterns. This is really helpful. And also, it can only get us so far. One of the reasons that I find that I rarely emphasize ways to challenge problematic thoughts and behaviors is because I find that doing that only gets us so far. I see this all the time, where I will sit with someone and we'll be having a conversation about something they want to change, and we just go through the whole paradigm together. And we always end up at this same place where they acknowledge, or if it's like, if someone's working with me, like, I'm able to acknowledge, like, yes, I see all the ways that this is problematic. I see all the ways this is not getting me what I want. I see the ways that my thought patterns are actually not accurate to the reality of the situation. Like, there's clarity there, there's some insight there. But what ends up happening is then the next thing that happens, the next thing that is said is, yeah, but what do I do about that? And what I find is that by challenging thoughts and behaviors, we're able to see the ways that they're problematic, but we're not targeting the thing that is driving those problematic thoughts and behaviors. So the way that I have chosen to approach topics on the podcast and the way that I work is that I, instead of going from the top down and saying, like, let me challenge these thoughts and behaviors, I go from the bottom up. And I say, okay, we see the challenge, like we see the difficult or the maladaptive or the problematic thoughts and behavior patterns. Can we just acknowledge those are true and real? Great. Can we acknowledge you're not getting what you want from those? Great. Now let's really get to the heart of it. Why is it that those things are showing up? Because when we look at thoughts and behaviors, we're acknowledging that everything is showing up as a way to meet a need. And if those thoughts and behaviors are coming from a problematic place, or they're at least problematic in the way they show up, well, that means they're probably trying to take care of us in some way. There's something inside that's misaligned or misattuned or that needs to be addressed. And as soon as we start to look at what's underneath and address that, the thoughts and behaviors change on their own, rather than you do all this work to explore the web that's in your mind and in your behavior patterns, and then you realize you're not ever actually addressing the real problem. So that's just one of the things that I've realized in different ways. And I definitely will engage in helping somebody in that way. Like, we'll have a good conversation and we'll get right up to the wall where we run out of answers and need some more. Along the same lines of this, something else that I've really, I think, deepened my understanding or experience with is that, like, when we look at inside of ourselves, it so often, and this is something that I've really struggled with for a long time, that I'm actively working on. When we look at having it, like, we express our anger in a way where it causes some problems, it causes conflict, it causes some kind of rupture in a relationship. We find ways that we're not able to follow through on agreements, or we struggle to get tasks done. And when we sit with those, it is so often, or so easy, I should say, to look at them from this place of being really critical, judgmental, or having shame around them. Like people who struggle with anxiety and depression, which I'm one of those people, often see anxiety and depression through this same lens. Like, wow, if only I was different, this would be better. I hate this part of me. So along the same lines of kind of challenging our thoughts and behaviors only gets us so far. The other side of that coin is that when we look at what's happening inside of us, when we look at things that we often dislike or struggle with, one of the things that is possible is for us to see those pieces of ourselves, those parts of ourselves, as really important and valid, as being pieces of ourselves that actually care very deeply about our safety, our security, our success, and that maybe are extreme or maybe like illogical, irrational, or that are maybe uncomfortable to experience. Like, even though that's true, like, we can also see them as being really important and valid. And we can come to have a lot of compassion for those parts of ourselves, or we actually relinquish the judgment and the criticism and the shame. That is something that has, I think, really clicked for me in the last maybe 3 months, where I really find that this has been a struggle for me in my own journey, but finding that place now, I feel like it creates so much more space for curiosity and compassion within ourselves, and then by extension for other people. So as soon as we can see all of our own parts as being really important and valid, we can start to see other people's in that way too, including that one person that drove in a way that was really irritating on the way to wherever you're going. That person who just sped past you dangerously, cut you off. The person who's like playing the music so loud at the intersection and in a way that is really disruptive. Or like whatever it is, we can start to see people's experiences as important and valid, even if we disagree, even if we feel like the experience of those parts isn't accurate to reality, we can still have a lot of compassion for them. And that creates a lot of movement and change inside. Another really important thing that I have been learning / am still working on. This is something that I really struggle with. But something that a good friend of mine has been trying to help me like really learn and embody. That's this idea that it's okay to be not okay. Like for me growing up, my house was very tumultuous. There was a big need for me to always be okay, because if I wasn't okay, there was a real lack of safety that would come in. Physical, emotional, didn't matter. I just always had to do my best to keep it together, which as a kid, it's never going to happen. But I did my best. School was no different. And then in the army, especially in combat, you have to be able to keep it together in really intense situations that you wouldn't think you would ever be in, let alone have to hold it together. And so for me, I felt like it was never okay to be not okay. And actually, just this last week, my therapist called me on it pretty clearly, which honestly I was appreciative of. She said, you hold it together really well. Like your body language, your tone of voice, like you're very composed, but your eyes tell a different story and you get a little wild around the eyes. And I was really appreciative that she was able to see that. as well as for my friends that have really been working to help me feel like it's okay to be not okay, because we need those opportunities. Like, we really need to be able to feel like we have permission to feel our feelings and be not okay, to feel like we can be a hot mess and it's not going to be too much. And that has been a really big thing for me. In fact, I remember at the very beginning of my internship last year, I think it was, I can't remember if it was at the very beginning in March or if it was actually in April, but I remember having a conversation with my supervisor, and one of the rules for interns is that you weren't supposed to take time off. Obviously, if you're sick, you're sick, but you're not supposed to schedule time off unless it's like a pre-existing thing or like a once in a lifetime, like really 10 out of 10 important thing. And then as little time as necessary. The idea is that there's a lot of investment being put into you as the intern, and you're there to accrue a certain amount of hours, which you cannot do if you're taking a bunch of time off. And I remember having conversations about this, and the one of the days of the year that's really hard for me is Memorial Day. I would say it's the one day of the year where I give myself permission, or at least have learned to give myself permission to be not okay. And I was looking at the calendar, and I knew the policy was I'm not supposed to take time off. And Monday is one of my busiest days of the week. And I remember talking to my supervisor and being like, hey, I really need to take Memorial Day off. I know I'm not supposed to, but I really need to. And we talked about the why behind it. And she looked at me and was able to say, like, yeah, of course. Of course we would let you take that day off. What else do you need in terms of support? Is one day going to be enough, or do you need 2 days off? Are there other ways that I can support you here? And I think up until that point, I'd felt a lot of shame and guilt around being not okay on Memorial Day. It was one of the things that I feel like I try not to make a big deal about. I didn't talk much about it. I often ended up working around Memorial Day and just try not to make a big deal about it. Try not to rock the boat. I felt like if I rocked the boat, things would be bad. But in that moment, it really helped me to feel like, actually, it's really okay. We can be not okay. We can be a hot mess, and that's allowed. And not just that it's allowed, but that it's important, and that people can be there to support us when we're in that hot mess place. Maybe more than we realized. And it's interesting. I mean, Memorial Day was just this past week, at least as of the time I'm recording. One of my good friends was on vacation over Memorial Day. They were out of the country, and like texted me today and said, hey, I want to check in with you at work tomorrow around how you're doing with Memorial Day. I didn't get to talk to you the day of. I thought about it, but I wanted to make sure you had space if you needed it. But I know it's a day that's really hard for you, and I just want to check in and see how you're holding up. It was such a beautiful thing to hear from a friend who's able to say, hey, this is a hard day for you, and I really hope you got what you needed, and I'm here to support you if you need that too. So it's okay to be not okay. You can be not okay and trust that people can help you with that and hold that with you. Something else I've really been thinking about, considering, working on, experiencing over the last, I don't know, probably 6 months again, is this relationship between creation and consumption. I feel like right now, for whatever reason and whatever value judgment you want to place on it, we live in a very consumption-oriented society. And I find there to be a lot of problems with that in terms of what that does to a person. But more specifically, what I find is that it robs us of our capacity for authenticity. So much of the time, I find that we start to find ourselves slipping into following trends and focusing on sameness versus diversity. And I think one of the contributing factors to that is that we spend more time consuming than creating. Then also, one of the challenges we come into that really fits in that need for sameness is we get a lot of comparison that happens, where We start to compare ourselves to other people and we say, well, I'm not as good as that person, therefore I shouldn't do this thing, which that's not what we're looking for. It's a shame message, and that's not what we need. That's not true to who we are. We are intrinsically different than everyone around us, and that is important. It's actually essential. If we rob ourselves of our capacity for diversity and differentiation, then actually we rob the entire community. We rob the culture and society at large of its life force. And we then experience a term that we talked about in my entrepreneurship class of commodification, where the same contribution, the same product, service, experience decreases in value over time. That's what ends up happening. When we prioritize consumption over creation, we also find that we ourselves have less life force, less energy, less of ourselves is present. And so one of the things that I think can be very, very helpful for all of us, myself included, is to prioritize creation over consumption. Something that I did just as a way to challenge myself was I did a photography challenge. So before I moved to Arizona, we lived in Utah. I was going to school in Salt Lake City. I took, for my fine arts credit, I took digital photography. And I loved it so much. I took a nature photography course where we actually went on an expedition for 3 days. And just for photography, I felt like I had my camera in my hand all the time. I was always taking pictures of my kids, taking pictures of my family, taking pictures of adventures, taking pictures of places. It was just always there. I was always scheduling trips. I was always researching. It was like there was so much life force that was present. And then we moved to Arizona, and I felt like that became a real challenge for me. And I have actually rarely touched my camera in the last 9 years, which has also been a real challenge for me because I miss it. So on a recent vacation, I took my camera. I took two things with me. I took my guitar and my camera. I didn't take my whole camera bag. I only took just like a kind of a great general use lens, a single lens, threw it in my carry-on. I took my guitar with me, and my challenge to myself was to take as many pictures as I could. And then what I wanted to do was I wanted to do a 7-day challenge where every day for 7 days, I shared one picture from that vacation. This is something I am really bad at. I'll take a lot of pictures and then not do anything with them. I think I know I have a lot of blocks around it, and that's something I'm working on. But what I found is that the time that I might have spent scrolling or just kind of being meaningless online, I was investing into this creative process. I was happier. I was more present. I was more engaged. I was more fulfilled. And I found that I actually used the internet way less. And I felt great about it. I also found that like when I shared those creations with people, those pieces of art that I had made, there was a lot of really beautiful support and connection that I got from people. Like somebody in the hallway at work was like, "Hey, Dan, I saw those pictures you've been posting. Like, I would love to sit down and pick your brain about photography." You know, and like somebody else at work came in. I was like, "Hey, Dan, like I saw some of those pictures you've been posting. Like those are really beautiful. How did you do that? Like, I'm curious how you created that image. Like, hey, did you actually take that picture or did you find that somewhere?" And we like so many conversations and so much connection ensued from such a simple thing of instead of scrolling Instagram or YouTube or anything else, I edited a photo and then I shared it with people. So that's a thing I've really been considering as well is the importance of creation over consumption. Actually, one of the players in my Dungeons and Dragons group is actually in some ways a really good example of this, where she really hates to throw things away. She hates to buy things brand new. She really prefers to fix things, repair things, make things and thrift things. Like she doesn't like to go out and get new stuff. And so, for example, she has these two pairs of shoes and they are beat to death. And we have glued them back together probably 3 times, 4 times. I don't know. It's been like 2 to 3 times for each shoe where she'll come over, we'll grab the shoe glue, we'll grab the clamps, we'll glue it back together, we'll repair it. No big deal. But we have continued to do that because for her, it's so much more important to prioritize repair and valuing what we have over continuing to consume new things. That isn't to say that we don't like engage in new activities and hobbies and interests and things like that. It's more about like, how are we, there's an intentionality here. Like, how are we really expending our effort and our energy? Something else I've really been thinking about is, and this is something that I've thought about for quite a while, but that I've thought about more recently as well in a different way. And that's that we can't selectively numb. I feel like this goes into creation over consumption as well. I find that consumption can often be a numbing activity where we're actively trying to not feel what we're feeling. Like what we feel is too big, too hard, too scary, too much. In some way, it's overwhelming in some way. So we numb it out by consumption, right? For example, like I know that I like to eat my feelings and I'm working on that. I also sometimes will just mindlessly disappear into like my Instagram feed and then realize like, what am I doing? The challenge here is that we can't selectively numb. It's something that Brene Brown talks about. And I really, when she said it, I thought that's really powerful, but I didn't really get as much of a grasp on it until I started working on that in myself. And then I have been able to work with some of my own parts of my system. Like I have a part that feels like the only way to be safe is to not feel things. Like feelings are too distracting, they're too overwhelming, and like the only way to be safe is to be really calm, cool, and collected. And the only way to do that is to numb everything out, which served me really well, I think, a variety of times in the past in really high intensity situations. But as a general day to day is really not that helpful. And I find really robs me of a lot of joy that can come. And so you might consider like, what are some ways that you're numbing out? What are some ways that you're unconsciously trying not to feel things and why? Because that can be a really helpful thing to consider also. Another thing I've been thinking about, and I heard someone else actually talk about this, or several people talk about this online. So in a podcast episode or a few other different places, but there's this phrase that I've had people use with me in a variety of settings. For example, I had recently been part of a gaming group, and when I was kind of meeting the person in charge, they talked about how they don't really have time and space to be what they called politically correct. Or in other words, like they didn't have space for a lot of compassion and empathy for other people's experience. They weren't concerned about how they spoke about or to people as much. Like they weren't really worried if they were offensive. And I think there is a place and like an importance to having really open and direct conversation. However, the thing that I found that really stuck with me was this idea, like, that's just how I am. Like, I'm too old to change. That's just how I am. This is a person in their 30s, by the way. And that really, like, I've heard that so many times. It's just how I am. It's just who I am. And it never sits well with me. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've come to this conclusion that it's not just who you are. It's not just how you are. It's how and who you have been up to this point. The future's not written yet. You're welcome and able to change whenever you care to. You're not stuck in this moment. Now, I say that understanding that not everybody has safety and security enough to change. I get that. But using the past as an excuse for not changing in the present, like that's meeting a need inside of us. Maybe that we're afraid of what could happen. I think often we get afraid of giving up our pain. Like our pain has become our identity and we're afraid of changing, because then who would we become when we change? The thing that I've found is that in working with our pain, in working with the hard, we actually gain access to more of the truest version of ourselves, because we spend so much less energy trying to protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe, like scanning the environment and trying to like pad the environment. The more able we are to be fully ourselves. And the more fully we are able to be ourselves, the more capacity we have for other people around us to feel safe and comfortable being fully themselves too. So hopefully, I mean, there's so many other things that I feel like I've learned and ways that I've grown over the last 2 years. A lot of that growth has really happened in the last, I don't know, 6 to 12 months. I mean, there's really been a season of growth for me. It's been really challenging in a lot of ways, but in really great ways. Like, it's been really hard and beautiful at the same time. So hopefully some of these lessons that I'm sharing that have just stood out to me as I made my list in my journal, hopefully some of those land and resonate with you and that you find some value in those. I realize that everybody's in a different place. Like, some of these things may feel really obvious to you. And I often find that after I write something down that I've learned, I realized, wow, that isn't actually that novel. I feel like I've known that the whole time, but it's just standing out to me in a different way. Moving forward, I'm really excited for what's to come. I mean, there's been a lot of big changes behind the scenes in the process of the podcast. For the first probably year, I was recording in my work office. And then when I quit my job, I didn't have an office anymore. Then there was the struggle of being able to try and find a place to record. I used my partner's office for a while. I recorded audio only. I tried using one of my kids' bedrooms for a while. It's just been a lot of struggle, a lot of hassle, trying to figure out, just like essentially relearning the process of the podcast, trying to incorporate video in a different way. Bringing in like a new co-host with Charmaine, who I really just love and appreciate so much. She is absolutely wonderful to be able to work with. Sometimes we'll record together. Sometimes it'll be just me. And that's something that we have talked about that will be the case moving forward. More often than not, I really hope to record with her. We've mostly been recording just the two of us. We haven't been doing as many interviews. That's honestly been an energy kind of thing. I just haven't had the energy or time to be able to schedule interviews, and also felt like there was a lot of really great conversation happening with Charmaine and I, just the two of us, that had a lot of value to it on its own. Looking forward, we're going to start interviewing some people again, bringing in some guests on the show. I've already been talking to a few people that I'm excited to bring on. And I'm always really open to exploring topics and or people that you feel like you would like to learn more about. Sometimes I know the things that we look at on the podcast can feel a little heady. It can be a little bit challenging. And honestly, I really can get that and appreciate that. It can be difficult to like take in information that is often very body centric. And that's a thing that I'm working on as well, is how do I explain and express some of the insights that I'm learning here in a way that can be digestible for you as a listener. Some other things that we're working on are helping just the quality of the conversation and the whole recording process to be better. So any thoughts or insights are definitely welcome to receiving those from you. And I really look forward to ways we can connect in the future moving forward. So with that, keep delving deep and embracing the journey.